Hi, everyone. So, welcome to the final day of Ivy Film Festival 2023. We're so excited to have you here for our last speaker of the festival. Um, so, we also have the VR arcade going on upstairs until 6 p.m. It's on the fourth floor, 4S, I believe. 4N? 4N. And there's our entire new media official selection up there. So please go and take a look. It's really, really cool stuff. And a lot of really hard work has been put into it by our new media team. And we also have 2 screenings right after this event. So please stick around for those. Yeah, really excited to have you here for our last event. Thanks for coming.
Hi everyone, my name is Vivian. I'm another festival director. We're really happy to have you here. So Festival Week is wrapping up. This is our last day. As Anna mentioned, we have 2 more screenings right here in Granoff. So that's very exciting. If you need any information on IFF in general, you can check out our website at ivyfilmfestival.org. Or you can always, chat with one of us and check out our program for more information. We're selling merch. We have a lot of this year's merch still, so hit us up if you're interested, and you can see pictures of it in the program. And yeah, I'll hand it off to Maya.
Hi guys, I'm Maya. I'm the 3rd festival director for this year. Thank you guys for being here for our last speaker event for the year. It has been such a wonderful festival week and really gratifying, and we just appreciate your presence here at all of our events. So I would like to begin with the fire safety warning just to get that out of the way. So in the event of a fire alarm, please proceed calmly to a nearby exit, leave the building, and move away from the doorway. Please note the location of nearby exits. Be aware that the way you entered may not be the most direct way out. Sitting or standing in the aisles and doorways is not permitted. Smoking is not allowed inside any university building. Please turn off and silence any pagers and cell phones. Okay, now that that's over, I am very excited to welcome our wonderful moderator for today, Lulu Cavici. She is a sophomore here at Brown. She's studying English and art history, and she is also our speakers and screeners coordinator, or one of them. She has been working all year long alongside her other coordinator, Gabby, and her team of incredibly hardworking members to curate all of the advanced screenings for the entire year, as well as Festival Week, and invite speakers to festival. So this wouldn't have happened without her. And we're just very proud of the work that she does and the work that the entire team does. So without further ado, Lulu.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining for Ivy Film Festival's conversation today. From After Tiller to Miss Americana, a discussion with documentary filmmaker Lana Wilson. I'd also like to note that this event is being co-sponsored by the Sarah Doyle Center for Women and Gender. And like the director said, my name's Lulu, and I am the student moderator for today's event. And I'm so excited to introduce you to our speaker for today, Lana Wilson. So just to give you a little intro, Lana Wilson is an Emmy-winning and 2-time Spirit Award-nominated director, writer, and producer. Her film, the Taylor Swift documentary Miss Americana, an opening night film of the 2020 Sundance Film Festival and a Netflix original, was named one of the 5 best documentaries of the year by the National Board of Review. Wilson's previous film, The Departure, about a punk rocker turned priest in Japan, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2017, played at festivals around the world, and was nominated for the 2018 Independent Spirit Award for Best Documentary. Wilson's first film, After Tiller, goes inside the lives of the 4 most targeted abortion providers in the country, taking a powerful and complex look at one of the most incendiary issues of our time. After Tiller premiered at the 2013 Sundance Film Festival and went on to win an Emmy Award for Best Documentary. It was also nominated for the Independent Spirit Award for Best Documentary, 4 Cinema Eye Honors, a satellite award, and the Ridenhour Prize. Wilson's latest project, Pretty Baby, Brooke Shields, a 2-part documentary about the actress, premiered this year at Sundance and released on Hulu on April 3rd. And we're so happy to have you here today, Lana.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you all.
So we will have time at the end for a little audience Q&A, but just to start off, I'm going to head right into my questions. So since we have so many students in the audience here today, I'd love to just hear a little bit about how you came into filmmaking. I know earlier at lunch today, we discussed how your undergrad experience at Wesleyan and how you had worked at an arts nonprofit. I'd love to hear how you sort of moved from that space into documentary filmmaking, specifically with your first movie, After Tiller.
Yeah, well, thank you again to Lulu and Maya and Gabby and everyone at the festival for having me. Yeah, I went to Wesleyan, which is for people who did not get into Brown. I loved it there. I studied film history and dance choreography. So I thought I was on more of a kind of film curator programmer track. I loved watching movies and making dance, but it didn't occur to me that I could become a filmmaker. So after college, I got a job at a movie theater in New York called Film Forum. And then I started working for a performance art biennial called Performa. That was a new organization. It's a 3-week-long festival where visual artists do live performances. And it was a job I was excited by because the founder was a performance art historian whose writing I really admired. Cool. So I was her assistant, and then I became a publicist, and then I became a book editor, and eventually I was the film and dance curator at the festival. So it was a great job, you know, in that it was doing film retrospectives and working with choreographers from all around the world. I did at the same time really miss a creative outlet. And I was always on the side, nights and weekends, writing screenplays, coming up with ideas for this and that creative project, and kind of just struggling to get anything off the ground, and also thinking, why do I feel this way? Like, I have a dream job. Lots of people would want this job. I should be really happy with this. That was what was kind of going on. And basically the thing that changed everything for me was this abortion provider named Dr. George Tiller was assassinated in his own church in Wichita, Kansas in 2009. And I had volunteered at abortion clinics as an escort for a long time, and it was an issue I really cared about. And I remember that when this man, Dr. Tiller, was murdered, I was horrified, like a lot of people were. I also watched the news coverage and remember being struck by how frustrating it was to see the way that this was being covered. It was basically the news would have an anti-abortion person and the pro-choice person having an intellectual debate. And I remember watching that thinking, this is so far removed from the actual circumstances of people who are seeking abortions and the doctors who are providing that care. It all felt like this kind of abstract intellectual debate that had nothing to do with the complicated, messy reality of people's actual lives. And I started to think, who was this guy who was murdered? I learned more about him. The news wasn't really saying anything about him except that he was controversial. I learned that he was a registered Republican, an evangelical Christian, a military veteran, but was also doing third trimester abortions, which supported still not by most people even who are pro-choice. So I thought, wow, like what an interesting biography. I wonder who's left now that Dr. Tiller is gone. Will there be anyone who will still provide third trimester abortions? And I started to think, what's it like, you know, to live with a target on your back? And wouldn't it be amazing if there was a documentary that was inside the lives of those doctors, exploring what it's like to be them and who are the patients coming to them for help? And I started to think, that's a story that I've never heard or seen before and that could shine a lot of light on this incendiary issue. And I started to then, because I was a film curator and very kind of snobby and judgmental about movies, I started to think, oh, someone's going to make that film and it's probably going to be shot terribly. They won't have any aesthetic sense. Or, you know, I started to muse and then become jealous of this theoretical filmmaker who was going to make the movie. And then I slowly realized that there was no other filmmaker. And it occurred to me, I was like, I'm talking all the time about wanting to make movies, but the only thing stopping me is actually making one. And I realized no one else is going to want to do this. Like, this is what I should do. And I think that because the subject felt so urgent to me, that gave me the little amount of courage that I needed to start, which I hadn't had before. And I had a friend who'd made documentaries already named Martha Shane, who I told her this idea. I asked would she partner with me on the documentary, and she said yes. So that kind of accountability and collaboration was another reason that I could start the process. And then, I think I was really lucky in that I'd worked at this art biennial Pro Forma for 8 years. So I went to my boss. At that point, I was kind of integral to the institution. It's a small team, I went to her and I said, is there any chance I could have 5 days, unpaid off next month to go film a little with these doctors? And I told her the idea for the movie, and I was afraid she would be upset or say no, but instead she literally wrote a check on the spot for $200 and said, you have to make this movie. This is your first donation. And that was very fortunate to have a boss who supported me making art of my own, because it enabled me to, keep my day job, but occasionally take a few days off here and there to make my first film.
No, that's really amazing. And to have that support with your first project that you're going into is truly wonderful to hear. I know we have the trailer for the film queued up. Maybe we could play it for some people.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
Target of anti-abortion extremists. Switch Talk claim was bombed in 1985, and then, at the age of 67, he was murdered at church.
The death of Dr. Tiller leaves only 4 doctors in the country who are able to perform late-term abortions.
There was absolutely no question in any of our minds that we were going to keep on doing this work. What really got me interested was when they started shooting doctors.
I got 5 shots fired to the front windows of my office. Many, many times I felt so alone. How many times have you received threatening phone calls because of what I did?
People call and I just hang up.
When I walk out the door, I expect to be assassinated.
Our goal is not merely to make abortion illegal, but to make it unthinkable. Late-term abortions, this is where everybody draws the line.
They said I was an abomination that should be driven from the state. I immediately started getting death threats in the middle of the night. You don't think that it only gets worse?
If I just give up and stop doing anything after 20 weeks,
Some women may get desperate and do things on their own. It's something that needs to be done.
What drives women to seek a frictionless abortion? Unless people understand what's going on for the woman, it's impossible to support it.
It's guilt no matter which way you go. Guilt if you go ahead and do what we're doing, or bring him into this world and then he doesn't have any quality of life. You have choices, they all suck.
Sometimes it's been hard for me to feel that I can continue.
Of course you don't want an abortion. Nobody wants an abortion.
She had a disease where she can't bend at her joints.
You could be a stillborn. She's just too far along. I can't help her. What's the right thing to do? What's really helping people? I just thought the other day, I can't retire like that.
There aren't enough of us.
God, it's so, I made this film 10 years ago, and it is so sad to watch in the context of Roe versus Wade being overturned. I haven't seen it for so long. I'd forgotten for a second, and yeah.
Yeah, the subject matter obviously remains very timely. You mentioned that you had co-directed the film with a friend of yours, Martha. I'd love to hear about it, the film tackling such complex and charged subject matter, how maybe this collaborative nature of working with Martha maybe helped you ease into the filmmaking process, or how you approached it together.
Yeah. Well, it's like I had the idea for the film and different images and feelings and thoughts about what it could feel like. And Martha had all of the knowledge and experience to kind of the knowledge of the process and how to actually make a film. I had none of that. I mean, I'd taken one 16mm production class in college. And so I think it was really great because I could learn by doing with Martha, but we also, I think, had a really respectful, sensitive collaboration where we had no deadline. We were making this independently. We're both working other day jobs. It took years. So we could challenge each other and disagree with each other and really try out any idea that came up. And the biggest other collaborator who came into the picture was our editor. So because we had no time limit, any idea, anything either of us wanted to try, we would try it, and experiment and see what worked and what didn't work. It was definitely a film that was all about access to the doctors and to the patients. There are 4 doctors in the film, 2 men and 2 women, and the 2 women wouldn't agree to participate until we were a year and a half into making the film. And when I look back now at it, I'm like, I can't imagine the film without them, because those 2 female doctors, their stories really focus on the ethical complexity and the gray area at the center of this, which I think allowed a lot of people to watch the film regardless of where they are in the political spectrum and find something to connect to in it and see the humanity of these doctors, even if they didn't agree with them sometimes, which is a very uncomfortable place to live in. But that was where we wanted people to live watching the film, thinking, I might not be okay with that decision, but that's this person's decision, not mine. So, the access was basically us hiding in a closet at the abortion clinic. And whenever a patient came in, the nurse would say, we have documentary filmmakers here. We're trying to shine a light on why people seek third trimester abortions. Would you be game to meet them, hear about the project? We're looking for people to share their stories. And, almost everyone understandably said no, but a few people said yes. And the people who said yes, I think, did so because no one ever imagines that they'll be in a situation where they're seeking an abortion so late in pregnancy. And it's always a lot of incredibly complicated, wrenching steps or situations that have led them there. So for the people who did agree to be in the film, they did so because they wanted other people to hear these stories as the only possible way of understanding how you can get there and why having this freedom is so important. So a big challenge then was that because this is so deeply stigmatized, it was then and it is now still, no one wanted their identity to be revealed. So that became a big thing that we had to experiment with in filming. How can we capture people and their stories without seeing their faces? And I think a big learning thing for me was, well, a lot of documentary filmmaking is trial and error in a great way. And that's what it's about. You're going out and you're trying something out and then you're changing what doesn't work. And you're trying to quickly adapt all the time to the reality and the actual people, but also to what's not working or working from your point of view as a director. So for instance, with these counseling sessions between patients and doctors that are a huge part of the film, it's like we can't show their faces. At first, Martha and I thought, okay, well, let's put the camera really far back and film behind the patients because we can see people's bodies and their body language, and that will be really important. But when we did that, it had this very wooden doll-like effect that actually did not work at all. It felt very stiff and strange. So then we experimented more, and we finally realized that the way we should film these counseling sessions was, let's say I'm a patient, have the camera right here, really close to the person. So just a little bit of hair is out of focus in the foreground, and you're seeing the doctor just over their shoulder. That created a sense of deep intimacy and connection with the patient. So that, that was a big formal challenge in making the movie. And then in editing, with Martha and I both doing it, it was a lot of trying out every idea. If we couldn't agree, having a test screening. I love test screenings. And that for us became a way of figuring out with outside perspective, well, is this working or not? And experimenting that way.
You mentioned how the project really took years where you were both working your day jobs, but it's so interesting to hear how having that extended time frame which you're working on the documentary allowed you to sort of try out things, find creative solutions to the challenges it posed. since we have it on the screen, I'll move on to your next feature-length.
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say just about what you just said is that, I actually always tell first-time filmmakers to keep your day job. I think it's really helpful. It's helpful. You need it financially, usually, but also I think it's really helpful mentally and emotionally and in terms of your identity. And I know this, I think, because when I worked at Performa for 8 years and I worked with artists, so I was seeing so many artists through this process from the other side of realizing a project from start to finish. And I think you should kind of keep the film. It's a little like if you're pregnant, you don't tell anyone you're pregnant for the first few months. You know what I mean? It's like keeping it secret because you only want to tell people about it when you're really sure and when you're ready. Because I found that when you're starting off, especially a longitudinal project like a documentary or a novel or something, if you start talking about it early on, then everyone in your life keeps asking, well, is it done yet? Is it done yet? What's going on? And that can be a whole pressure of its own. Whereas something like this, almost no one knew we were doing it. And that gave us freedom in a way to try things, to fail, to make mistakes, to keep going, to, in a way that if everyone was asking about it and waiting for it and expecting it, and if I was in the headset of, oh, I hope that this is as good as everyone wants it to be, rather than what is the best possible thing for the film, it becomes this whole other distraction. So I think day jobs are wonderful things to have to maintain your grounding, financial stability, but also to keep your identity and sense of self that's not your artwork in a way.
Good advice for any of our filmmakers in the audience. Keep that in mind. Like I was saying, your next feature-length documentary was called The Departure, and it's such a beautiful and empathetic film, and it follows Itetsu Nemoto, a Buddhist priest, as he works to counsel people with suicidal thoughts, but while also grappling with questions about life and health himself. And I'd love to know just how you came to this subject matter as the topic of your second documentary.
Yeah. Well, I read 2 articles about this priest, Itetsu Nemoto. One was in The New Yorker and one was in Tricycle, which is a Buddhist quarterly magazine. And I was really struck by a single sentence in one of these articles that described a particular retreat Nemoto does when suicidal people come to him for help. And the retreat is that he has the suicidal person role play their own death. So he has them write down on little pieces of paper who are the 3 most important people in your life, what are 3 important objects, and what are 3 wishes you have for the future. And then they go through this role play of dying, and as they go through it, they crumple up each piece of paper and throw it away. And they imagine saying goodbye to each one of those things. And then at the end, they lie down under a shroud, and he turns all the lights out, and they imagine dying. And the idea is that when you think about anything that you can think of, even if it's very small in your life, that you do love and that you do treasure, realizing that you're going to have to say goodbye to that can help remind you of what makes life worth living. And I remember reading just the sentence about that retreat and thinking that for me, just reading about it had brought me through the process myself. And I thought, wouldn't it be incredible to have a film that takes the audience through that experience themselves of thinking about their own lives as they watch it and what makes life worth living. So that was the initial idea. And then I went to meet Nemoto in Japan and immediately saw something that reminded me of a lot of people who are in the caring professions that I know, like social workers, counselors, doctors, nurses, and that he was wonderful at giving advice to other people, saving other people, literally, but was himself totally self-destructive. He was a party boy, drinking all night, partying at clubs. He had a 6-month-old son who he had barely any relationship with. And so I thought, what a fascinating person to have all these contradictory qualities inside of him. And I thought that's very relatable too, because isn't it much easier to give advice to other people than to take the advice yourself? And I got to know him, and I spent over 3 years making that film with him. And
very relatable, and I feel like a very rich subject for a documentary.
Yes.
Lots of material to work with.
Yeah.
Maybe we show the trailer for that as well.
There we go.
これが全て。
The departure, like even as you can just see in the trailer, I've seen the full thing, but it's just such a visually stunning film, and I feel like it includes shots that really invoke a sense of loneliness or like contemplation. I think in the trailer you saw the shot of like driving the motorcycle through the tunnel. It's really striking. So I'd love to know what kind of visual resources you were maybe drawing on when making this film, if you had an idea of what you wanted it to look and feel like coming into it, or maybe how that changed over the course of making it.
Yeah, that's a great question. And Marion Cotillard is not in The Departure. Just to explain, this is from a Dardenne Brothers film, The Still, because yeah, with The Departure, I saw this opportunity because my background was in film history and curating, and I love fiction films. I saw an opportunity to make a documentary that felt like a fiction film and that had a really rich visual style. And part of that was because Nemoto, the priest, he himself was an artist. You know, every retreat he did for people, he staged almost like a playwright would stage it. He thought of the colors, the lights, what are people wearing? What are we touching? What props are we using? And so he was game for a real collaboration in that way. And it was another thing. I mean, I still, again, I kept my day job the whole time, which meant I could have as much time as I wanted to make The Departure the way I wanted to. And, you know, so I started out, I think we all have a palette in our heads and have instincts that aren't something we're born with, but that are shaped by what we see. So for me, I really love like slowly paced international art cinema, or not slowly paced, deliberately paced. But so you notice that you're drawn to certain compositions, for example, and that might be because it reminds you of movies or paintings or photographs or other images that you love. So I'll whip through, you know, some of my favorite films, and these are just like reference images that I showed my cinematographer and producers at the start, with the idea being wanting often to create a sense of intimacy, but not meaning you have to be close to someone with a camera. You can have really intimate scenes where you're actually quite far away from people. So here, these are just, this is a Romanian film. This is a Finnish director, Aki Kaurismäki. So loving these, and also because so much of The Departure two-person conversations, looking for references that are reminiscent of those situations. This is from an Apichat Weerays Thakel film, the Thai director, and this was like a reference for the time we spent in the hospital with Nemoto. That's a Ho Xiaoshen movie. So I think this is a Hirokazu Koreeda movie. So these are just visual references and a shooting style that this is a photograph, I think, by Jeff Wall. So these are all things that we just looked at and had in our mind as we filmed. These are motorcycle shots. Yeah, because this is a Wong Kar-wai movie. I think it's Fallen Angels, maybe. This is another Ho Xiaoshen movie. So, this is Kid on a Bike. So just looking for things and, kind of clubbing images. This is a Mia Hansen love movie. So just having all these reference images, and then often, let's say we're shooting at a club, or like this was a reference for this sequence where Neimoto walks through this empty shopping arcade at night. Well, how did they create this effect in that film? Just analyzing the lighting, the composition, and using that as a jumping off point to make images like this or inspired by this ourselves. Like that was a big part of giving it a fiction film quality. Another part was in the edit, structuring the story so that it's very mysterious. You don't really know what's happening for a long time. The film starts at a nightclub, and then you follow this guy who's dancing at the club on a motorcycle ride home, where he then puts on a priest robe, and you're like, what? What is happening? And then he invites a bunch of people in and says, welcome to the departure. Today we're going to learn what it's like to die. And you're like, what? So I think that is an experience that is more often employed in fiction films, where it's more mysterious and the audience is often given more space to wonder and ask questions, and information is revealed very slowly. And the departure is like that too. For example, in a documentary, a convention might be you hear about someone's childhood in the first 10 minutes of the film. In the departure, you only hear about Neimoto's childhood at an hour into the film. So that's another reason I think that it feels more like a fictional film. And here's an example too of, we would film, let's say we're filming all day. At the end of the day, I always look at the footage, review it like on my laptop and think, what's working, what's not working? And then I'll pull stills, and then I'll sit with the cinematographer the next morning before we shoot again. This is so embarrassing. I haven't looked at my own notes for years, but some of this stuff is kind of humiliating to read back years later. But just to give a sense of those are still numbers, things that are working, things that aren't working. So, and then we would kind of discuss it. And it's not always like that I have the answer for the cinematographer. It might be like, I really like this effect in this shot. What do you think causes that? How can we change that? And often you're going from a place of, I want the audience to have this feeling here. How can we create that visually? So those are notes. And then, I wanted to share, this is a little planning document for a scene we shot for the end of the film. I think with documentary, there's often a sense, audiences often think, oh, you show up with your camera and you react to what's there. And there's a little bit of that, but actually in my experience, you're often planning at a much greater level of detail than you would with a fiction film, especially if you're doing observational verite shooting like The Departure is. So you're planning, you might have a vague sense of the day, like, oh, Neimoto's having a retreat and then he's gonna see his mom later. So then you're thinking of, okay, well, what is the point of the scene of the retreat? What is the point of him talking to his mom? Like, what do we wanna capture and how do we wanna express it? So you plan it out in this very detailed way, almost like Robert Bresson, the French director, once said, filmmaking is like a military campaign. You're planning it out with this rigorous level of detail, but with the documentary, you then can't control anything. So then people, you're planning on someone walking through this door, but then everyone arrives at the other door. So, so I'm always trying to plan it out. So this is the final scene of The Departure. You see the same retreat that the movie opened with, the paper crumpling thing I just mentioned. And this is the game plan for me and Emily, the cinematographer, where we're moving, when we're going off the tripod, when we're shooting handheld. I made these are terrible storyboards. Like, this is my own crappy drawings, but, some vague sense, like the first image, is a crumpler in the foreground of the shot and other people in the background, that kind of, whatever. For me, I'm just like, I know this looks really rough, but as long as it can communicate the idea, that's all we need. And then sometimes I find it, if you can't describe something in words to someone you're collaborating with, sometimes it can help to bring up reference images, even if that seems very off tonally for the project. Like this is a still from Solaris, the Tarkovsky movie, that I wanted to indicate the kind of science fiction feeling of this surgery. Neimoto was having a heart surgery. Or this is a great 1950s melodrama called Ridden on the Wind by Douglas Sirk, where I love the lighting because it's this stunning, moody twilight, but then there are also these warm colored accents in the frame. And that was the kind of lighting I wanted for this final retreat. So these are the shots in The Departure that were inspired by that, where we could hide lights in the altar room, basically, to give this final retreat a slightly more theatrical, exaggerated effect almost than the opening retreat of the movie, if that makes sense, to kind of distinguish it stylistically. Yeah.
That's so cool to see sort of the fictional reference points you were using, and then also just to think about lighting. And The Departure really does feel at times more like a narrative film, and it's so interesting to hear about how you meld like the reference points and sort of the genres. So thank you.
Yeah, because you're always lighting, even if you don't have lights. You can flip lights on and off. You can turn on little lamps everywhere, and every little thing in a room and every decision you make about where the camera is, how close or far you are, it all has an effect on the audience in some way. So the reason I love analyzing fiction films or kind of reverse engineering them to learn things to apply to documentaries is that in a fiction film, every single thing is chosen. So you can think about, why did they make that choice and what effect did it have on me watching it? And then I can go into the real space where I'm filming something for a documentary and think, well, how will this choice affect someone? And can I shift anything here, or do I need to just let it be?
Super interesting to hear. In the interest of time, I might have us hop to Miss Americana.
Totally. So this is a web series I made. We'll skip that. It's good. If anyone's afraid of spiders, we shouldn't play it anyway.
So I know we do have lots of interest in Miss Americana in the audience. So maybe we just start off by showing the trailer.
Yeah.
Just gonna go have fun. No one out there that I know of in the audience actively hates me. Not get dead face. Ready to do this? Ready. Totally ready. Throughout my whole career, label executives would just say, a nice girl doesn't force their opinions on people. A nice girl smiles and waves and says thank you. I became the person that everyone wanted me to be. I think that Taylor Swift, she is annoying. All her model friends, guys that she's weekend. Nobody physically saw me for a year. And that was what I thought they wanted. I had to deconstruct an entire belief system, toss it out and reject it. American glory. It woke me up from constantly feeling like I was fighting for people's respect. It was happiness without anyone else's input. I need to be on the right side of history. Taylor Swift broke her silence on politics. On people, voice in a whole new way. It feels fucking awesome. I feel really good about not feeling muscle anymore, and it was fun to do it. Nothing feels better than this moment. Handling my heart issues for vocals.
Okay. We've never really got a good take without them, have we?
No.
I know people are very excited about talking about Miss Americana. One question I have for you is that when I was researching the film, Taylor Swift had mentioned that before the making of this documentary, she hadn't done an interview for almost 3 years. So I'd love to know, with subjects across your projects, how do you sort of work to gain their trust for this period where you're entering into their lives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because a part of it is very simple and immediate. You meet them and within seconds they trust you or they don't. But then another part of it is also building trust over years. Usually all of these films take years to make. So there's something you have to get immediately. You have to click to have some kind of chemistry connection instantly. Because think of when you meet people, you feel like you trust them or you don't almost instantly. You feel something, but then, you also have to build it over a long period of time. And this project was so much about our relationship and trust. And it came about in a very crazy way. I mean, I was finishing editing this web series, which is about a neuroscientist who has a cure for fear. And I literally just got a call from Netflix saying, would you be interested in making a documentary about Taylor Swift? And it was really, my previous one was being about abortion, suicide, PTSD. You're thinking, what? But I was immediately, I just thought, of course, yes. I mean, I was a fan, so I knew her music really well, which gave me the sense that I knew at least a little bit about her because her music is so personal. And, basically, I guess Netflix had sent a list of possible directors to Taylor for, the original idea was to make a tour documentary. Taylor went to Netflix saying, I want to make a tour documentary. What do you think? And they were like, yes, but would you also consider something more personal, like a more personal documentary? And so that's where this idea came from. And they'd sent her a list of 10 directors, and she watched my work and really responded to it. So I basically went to meet her, and, she was incredible, smart, funny, deep. She had fascinating questions about my films. She'd watched them and had kind of analyzed the narrative structure and had questions about specific music cues. Like, it was incredible. And so I could see that, she herself is such an accomplished artist, obviously, but she also, I got the sense from the first meeting, I think if you're doing a project about any kind of celebrity, the fear is always, will this be a puff piece? Or will this be hagiography? And I could immediately see that Taylor was not afraid to be really candid and for this project to go into really serious places. And I could also see that she was going to give me the space that I needed to do that. And she really wanted a perspective on her life. So what was so exciting to me about the project was that, Taylor hadn't done an interview in a long time. So there was an initial feeling with meeting her where I could just tell, I think we could both tell, like, this is going to work. This is going to be great. You have that. But then there is also trust building over a long period of time. And whenever you're making a documentary, with any subject, with Taylor, because she's such a massive star and a public figure, she was more guarded in a way because she'd been through so much in the public eye. So it's understandable. So it really took time to get there and to get the full trust and access to film, everything. But with any subject, this is the case where I find you're always having to tell them, well, what is the overall vision of the film? What is the big picture goal here? Because think if you're the subject, it's very annoying. Someone's showing up all the time with the camera. Can I follow you back to your home? Can I film you talking to your mom? It's usually awkward and uncomfortable. No one wants you there usually. So you always have to be able to explain why you want something. One of the trickiest moments to film for Miss Americana, this might be surprising, but it comes quite early in the film. I had this idea of getting to see Taylor on stage in front of 80,000 people and then cutting to her alone in the car, going to her hotel room after the show, to have this juxtaposition of the superstar and the human being immediately. And it was really hard, just like logistically, to like get into the car after the show. There's security everywhere. There's chaos, and I finally was just like, hey, like, we really need this because this is a way to capture in 5 seconds what your life is like, and that you are on stage in front of so many people and giving so much to your fans, but then you are this person who goes alone to the hotel room at the end of the night. And we need the audience to feel that in the beginning of the movie. And she's like, okay, yeah, I get it. Let's do it. So you're constantly having conversations like that and always coming back to what is the fundamental shape of the film and what is the journey that we're going on. And I think that any subject basically wants to hear from the director, not that you need to have all the answers or to know the ending, but what are you compelled by? What are you drawn to? And why are you excited to film X, Y, and Z? And with Taylor, I think what I was so struck by when I first met her was not only that she was at this remarkable pivot point in her life and in her career, where she was coming from being in hiding to wanting to re-enter the world in a new way and wanting, she was examining her own values, her belief system, wondering, have I been living so much for other people that I've forgotten about my own goals in a way? Am I worrying so much about what other people think that I'm not just, enjoying my life the way I want to? And it was that, but then it was also that I could see this transformation happening, in that it was like a coming of age experience where she was coming into her own in this new way, in a way that meant ultimately her deciding to do something different than even what her parents wanted her to do. And so that's why I thought of it as a coming of age moment. We all have these moments where we have to say to the people who love us the most, I love you, I understand your point of view, but I have to go my own way now. And that's what this period of time that I was filming Taylor was very much about. And I thought that was such a universal experience, and one that would open up the movie to audience members who might think, oh, I don't like Taylor Swift, or I don't like her music. It doesn't matter. You can still, I hope, see yourself in this incredible journey she went on during this 2-year period I was filming, even if you think, oh, I don't like her music,
No, that coming of age narrative and seeing these transformative moments in her life really comes through in the film. And I've watched it with people who maybe aren't familiar with all her music, but they still are really moved by the journey that we go on with her in the documentary. And thinking about that sort of coming of age narrative that you develop in the film, we sort of see a similar arc in your latest project, Pretty Baby Brooke Shields, which just came out on Hulu. You should all go see it. But I'd love to know, did you sort of take any themes you had begun exploring in Miss Americana into working on Pretty Baby, where you they both deal with women who had very prominent roles in the media and had to deal with systemic misogyny, and having their image also be an iconic one across the world. How did those two projects maybe carry into one another?
Yeah. Well, I think that they are similar in that these are two women who experienced levels of global fame that almost no humans in history have experienced. So they share that, but in other ways, I saw them actually as very different journeys and stories. I mean, first, I think because Miss Americana was a present tense, a pivotal moment of change in her life, versus Brooke's story, I think what I was so compelled by when I first met her, she gave me this hard drive of footage that her mother had collected over almost 50 years. Wow. And I took this hard drive home and started looking at it. And I was so struck by this gradual evolution over 57 years, basically. I almost saw it as like the Richard Linklater movie Boyhood, like a documentary version of that with Brooke Shields. But I started to look at this archival footage, and what jumped out at me the most immediately was, how many of you, has anyone seen the film yet, Pretty Baby? Okay, great. Some people, and we have our amazing production assistant, Elliot, is here, so yes. One of the things that really struck me was Brooke at age 12. At age 11 was in a notorious French art film called Pretty Baby, where she plays a child sex worker. And I saw this press tour she went on at age 12, where she was basically in the hot seat being grilled on television by a series of male journalists who would, on the one hand, praise her for being so beautiful and for having such a great body and face, but then they'd say, but aren't you too sexual? Hasn't this gone too far? You're participating in child pornography. And when I saw that footage, I had a kind of weird moment of recognition, because I thought this dynamic hasn't gone away at all. I still think that girls are in an impossible situation where, on the one hand, we are telling people the way you look is the most important thing, and your value is primarily in being beautiful and desirable. I think that if you look at magazine covers in a grocery store, for instance, women are still primarily celebrated for being desirable to heterosexual men. And on the other hand, if someone is too sexual, they are blamed, condemned, and punished. And it's a bit of this minefield situation where there's like an invisible line, and you don't know when you're crossing it, and when you do cross it, you're in trouble. And so I thought it would be so interesting to actually look at what has not changed here, because I saw Brooke as her story is that over the course of many decades, it was a subtle evolution from being an object to being a human being. And she had to really fight to gain her humanity and to find her identity. Because she was a child star, she was basically born into being a symbol, first of this scandalous child, sexualized girlhood. And then she became a kind of purity and virginity symbol during the Reagan years. And then she had to kind of get through all of that and figure out, well, what is my own identity? Do I even have an opinion? What is it? Where are my instincts? So I kind of saw it as, in a culture that wanted Brooke to shut up and remain an object commodity, she insisted on doing otherwise. So that was the journey that I wanted to focus on in this film.
For anyone who has not seen the documentary on Hulu, I definitely recommend watching it. It's fantastic. Keeping in mind time, I do want to give an opportunity to members of the audience to ask Lana any questions if they have any. Feel free to raise your hand. Caroline.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. Pop it out.
Oh, cool. I love that. Yeah. 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 Well, I love that the fan club is here. That's awesome. And sexism is a huge part of the film industry. Sexism, racism, transphobia. The film industry is very regressive in some ways, but it's also a world of art and artists. So there's so much possibility there too. And, I think that part of the reason I didn't realize I could become a director until later was because I hadn't really seen any model of like what a female director looked like. I kind of had an image in my head of like Steven Spielberg, like playing with the Super 8 camera when he was a boy, and no one ever, gave me a camera. I didn't think to ask for one though, And I remember that I took one production class in college, and I remember that the head of the film department had kind of taken me aside before the class, and she was like, look, Lana, what's going to happen is the professor's going to bring out the camera, and all the boys are going to crowd around it and start touching it and playing with the buttons and hitting this and that, and all the girls will quietly sit on the periphery of the room, and you have to kind of push forward and say, it's my turn now, give the camera to me. And I was like, what? And basically what she predicted was exactly what happened in the class. And I remember I was kind of like, it's my turn now, give the camera to me. I couldn't believe I was saying this, but then I had it and I didn't know what to do with it. So I like fake spun dials and there is a kind of aspect of, I think also I didn't go to film school. And so I've experienced many times this kind of like, one aspect that a lot of male technical crew members in documentary that I've experienced many times is this kind of, talking to me in technical jargon and trying to kind of make me feel like I don't know the answer to something because they're lecturing me about f-stops or something. But in the end, you as the director, you're the only person who knows what the movie is. The only person. And you just have to remember that. No one else knows. Everyone should be bringing unique skills to their different roles on the film. And I think it's great when people are challenging you and know more than you about different things, but no one else knows what the movie is. And so what I have learned over time is just the most important thing is to communicate that and to find out ways to get that vision into existence and to kind of get everyone on board with that. And you kind of have to project the confidence that you have some of, but you might be faking other parts of it, that you know what the movie is and it's all figured out. So, I directed my first commercial like 4 years ago, and documentaries, when you're filming a documentary, you're not saying action, cut, stuff like that. And I remember stepping onto this commercial set, 150-person crew, and I was like, am I supposed to be yelling cut? Like, I had no idea. I've never even been on another film set. And I called a friend who's a commercial director, and it's like, do I really yell cut? That seems so douchey. And she was like, yes, you have to really. And I was like, oh my God, But so I was just like, okay, this is what I'm doing. It's almost like you're, performing. You are performing in a way as the director, because part of it is knowing the craft and knowing what you want and all of that. But it is also what I mentioned earlier, and even talking about working with Taylor, how, she's busy. She's 200 trillion things going on. To get her to film something, you have to explain why, and be like, we need this because of X. And any subject will get it if you can put it in the context of the big picture. This is the journey we're taking the audience on, and we can't do it unless we have X. You're constantly having to do that. So I would say that it's a long-winded way of saying that, yeah, there's a lot of sexism in the film industry, but I have found that by just always holding on to your vision and knowing that you're the only person who has that, that's how you can kind of get through all of the challenges. Yeah.
I think we have time for one or two more questions if anyone has any. Yeah.
Hi. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and I actually have a couple of visuals here that will relate to this. So, yeah, I mean, the subject, they've lived their life. So you have to listen to them and their story, but you're also looking for what the specific focus of the film could be and what is a way into their life that makes this accessible to the audience. Because you can't get every aspect. Human beings are very complicated. You cannot get every aspect of a person or their life into 90 minutes or into 2 hours. You have to choose. You have to choose a theme and a focus. And so what you're often looking for is, well, what is the keyhole in here? And what is something that once it's clicked, you can see it throughout the person's life. So it's just like there's 100 different ways of telling someone's story. What is yours and why is that relevant to now? So it's often a conversation, like with the Brooke Shields project. What I told her early on is that what I thought was so compelling about her was that she gradually gained agency over her own life. And so I'll show you, I have here, I always start a project by, I meet the person or people. You're doing a little research, maybe you test shoot a few days, and then I kind of write a treatment, almost like a short story. Like if I had to turn in this movie tomorrow, what do I think it would be? It helps me to think of it as a short story. And this is a page of, these are actually, we don't have time for this. These are kind of interview references we did the interviews for the Brooke Project with these paintings that were made for Annie Leibovitz, the photographer. Anyway, we're not gonna go into that. But so this is the treatment that I wrote a couple of weeks into the Brooke project. After watching a bunch of footage, talking to Brooke, but we hadn't filmed anything yet. And I was just like, what is the overall shape of this? I was so struck by when I first met Brooke, she mentioned that she'd never looked at herself in the mirror for decades. And I was like, what? You, the most beautiful person in the world, didn't look at themselves in the mirror? And so I thought, well, why couldn't she look at herself in the mirror? Because she didn't know her own identity, So right away I was like, okay, the trajectory of this is Brooke can't look at herself in the mirror, and she can look at herself in the mirror. She doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know who she is. What is the start and the end point of the film, and how do you change over the course of it? And then, going from being an object to being a person, an icon to being a human. And I wrote out this kind of treatment. And I will say that when I look at this now, I write it out and then I put it away for a year and only come back to it once we're deep in the edit and I get stuck. But I noticed that when I look at this treatment, a lot is how the film turned out, but one thing that is very different is that I didn't go into 1970s Hollywood and all of this film history kind of stuff. We experimented with that at one point, but it felt like a weird film historical digression from our connection to Brooke as a person through the whole movie. So it just wasn't working. And so we ended up, this is the kind of ultimate then we get to a point deep in the edit where we're trying to just focus. So every sequence is like, what is the text? And what is the subtext of everything? And at that point, it was like, okay, there's Brooke's story, but then there's this bigger cultural story of how girls and women are perceived by others. And how can we get at that in every single scene so that it feels like a progression and a journey, and it doesn't feel repetitive or circular or like we're losing sight of that the whole time. So that's a kind of example of, tracking. Like one idea was, for example, in the second part of the documentary, Brooke talks about having sex for the first time and kind of gaining sexual agency. And she had no connection to her own sexuality as an adult. And we had to make that feel very different than when she was 12 years old and highly sexualized. And what is the difference there and why? And so anyway, so I'll do something like that. And basically, to use Brooke as an example, she tells me her whole life story over many days of interviewing. And then I ask a lot of follow-up questions around the specific themes that I think are most interesting. And I think it's a mix of, well, what do you feel emotional hearing? Like I'm a bit of an emotional barometer or audience proxy the whole time, because I think if you feel something, that means it's something that a lot of people could relate to, connect to. So do you feel chills? Did you tear up here? Do you find this really funny? It's following your emotions. But then it's also, well, what is the shape of this overall and how does this make sense? So, I've been lucky in that none of the subjects I've worked with have been like, well, that's not me, or that's not my story, or that's wrong. Like they've all been so open to this process of sharing everything with me, but then letting me shape it. And of course I want it to feel honest and right to them. And like, yes, you've captured something about my life. And I think they have all ultimately really felt that way. But I don't think any subject would say, all of it is in the documentary. It's just not possible. So you're making a choice, and that's where the kind of Venn diagram of your subject's experience and your perspective as the director, you're looking for that overlapping point.
Any final question from the audience?
What was the first movie you remember watching and being like, oh, this is what I love, this is what I want to do, whether as a film historian or curator or...
That's such a cool question. And I know the answer because I think about them. It's two movies and I think about them constantly. And they're, the first one was this movie I saw when I was 12 that I then went to see over and over in the theater called Dead Man Walking. Do you guys know this movie? It's about Susan Sarandon playing a nun who's counseling Sean Penn, who is on death row. It's very dark. I don't know. I was the only 12-year-old in the theater, but it was, I think I watched it and I found it to be an emotionally cathartic experience. And I learned so much about it, about forgiveness. And I think Sean Penn plays someone who has been convicted of a truly horrific crime and he's being executed. And I think that it was just having this emotional experience, but having the chance to kind of learn more every time I watched it about, thinking about how there is no such thing as good and evil, how it's all a spectrum and a gray area and complicated, and these ideas around forgiveness and what punishment is in our society and the justice system. And so that's a movie that really affected me. And then the other movie is In the Mood for Love, the Wong Kar-wai film, which I saw when I was like 15 when it came out. Another one of those movies I saw over and over in a theater, which is just this unbelievable aesthetic, stretch printing, very romantic, slow motion, intense use of score, and just like a kind of aesthetic and a style I'd never seen before. There's very little dialogue in the movie. So I think that taught me a lot about how much can be communicated without any words, and how a feeling and a tone and the mood can be just as meaningful as plot, which is kind of practically non-existent in that movie.
Such a fun question to end on.
Thanks.
I want to thank Lana for being here today. Yes. We had such a lovely conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for coming and thanks for having me.